Hello, welcome again to FairtaX Power Radio. I'm Bob Paxton,
I'm Bob Scarborough.
and we are the FairtaX
Uh,
guys. Oops, fat. If you hold Fat Albert off to the side, he disappears against the virtual background here. So I got to hold it right in front of me. There we go.
yeah,
If you,
that's a pretty good analogy. For those of you on video, you'll be able to see what I'm talking about when the background that Bob P is using will anything that's not in front of him will disappear into the background. And
yeah,
wouldn't that be great if the fair tax is passed? We know that the Internal Revenue Service will disappear into the background.
yeah. Oh, there, IRS, boom, gone. Okay, if you're listening to an audio only podcast or on the radio station, you'll have to look up the video archive on the
Oh,
YouTube
man.
channel or the Rumble archive or something like that, and check it all out. But how you doing there? We ready to
Yeah.
go again?
Yes, sir. Let's do it to it.
All
It's
right. Well, let
.gov is always top
let
on the
us
list of our.
let's see what the Congress critters are up to. They are back from their summer break, and this one caught my eye right away. You know that I like trains. I'm a rail fan of some kind. And this is Senator Jim Banks of Indiana has S 2758, the Freight Rail Car Act of 2025.
I
And you
love it.
think, what in the world does that have to do with the tax code? But you open that thing up and it says that this is a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code to provide, oh, would you believe it, another tax credit, to provide a tax credit to encourage the replacement or modernization of inefficient, outdated freight rail cars, and your favorite phrase, for other purposes. Why do you have to use the tax code to encourage railroads to modernize their equipment? That makes no sense. I mean, if you're in a business and you've got competitors, you want to be as efficient as you possibly can. So I
Without
don't
a
think there would be enough pressure in the free market to do that without having to get into the tax code. But Senator Banks of Indiana seems to think differently.
it's insane. And when you think about how technology has gone, computers especially, away from a mechanical or even video or audio for that matter, away from cumbersome mechanical uh, uh, equipment that's needed to run. And you look at rail service, and I don't know that there's any. I mean, over the rail is much better than over the road, uh, although both indicate strong forward economic positive motion. But you can move for long distances at a lower cost using rail. But why does it need to be? Why do incentives need to be in the tax code for all of that?
Oh, I don't know. That's making me thirsty here. I've got to
Yes, it's time for today's
get into
break
another can of cheerwine here.
from Cheerwine. Not an official
Ah,
sponsor, but if they were, we'd be in trouble because that's all you'd see in the background of Bob.
okay. Let's move on here. This is HR 5225 from Representative Doug LaMalfa, I think is how you pronounce that, in California, District 11. This is the Protect Innocent Victims of Taxation After Fire Extension Act.
I
Read
love
that
it.
again. Protect Innocent Victims of Taxation After Fire Extension Act.
Mer-
Oh,
Mercy me.
mercy. Absolutely. Mercy me. Okay. And you dig into the text of this. This is a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code to exclude qualified wildfire relief payments from gross income and your favorite for other purposes. So again, as Professor Kendall told us a while back, one of the real problems with an income tax is defining what income is. And if this bill passes, wildfire relief payments will not count as income, even though that is money in your pocket. Yeah. That's
I'm,
about all you can say, isn't it?
yeah, and we do this every week only to underscore how complicated the tax code gets because of the way our tax system is designed. Obviously, the benefit would be to wipe all of that out, put the burden on us to decide when we pay our taxes through a tax on consumption, as
All
opposed
right.
to a tax on income where the government gets money before we do to feed our families.
All right, let's get through this. We got something really cool to get to later on here in FairtaX Power Radio. This is from Senator Scott down here in Florida, S 2744, the Federal Disaster Tax Relief Act of 2025. And that one is a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code to codify and extend the rules for personal casualty losses arising from major disasters and the rules for the exclusion from gross income of compensation for losses or damages resulting from certain wildfires. Can you have a tax code without that stuff in it? It's just insane. I think we'll say we need to move on so as not to
That
impinge
way.
too much on what we got to get into later. This is S 2731. This is from Adam Schiff, and this is also has a companion bill, HR 5206. This is the Empowering Striking Workers Act of 2025. And you dig into that little goody, and you find that this is also a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code and the Social Security Act to provide that an individual engaged in a labor dispute may receive unemployment benefits. So I think we'll just let that sit there without comment and
Not
say
at all.
other than what the heck is that doing in the tax code? And one more, this is from Senator LaHood of Illinois, HR 5146, the Federal Receivership Fairness Act. But anytime you see the word fairness in the title of it, you have to worry, oh, mercy. But this is a bill to amend the Internal Revenue Code to, again, provide for certain rules regarding determination of tax in the case of a receivership. So how do you like that? You just put that in the tax code, and then you tell the bureaucrats, all right, you guys write the regulations to make this happen.
It's crazy.
That's a major problem with our tax code, and all of that goes away with a fair tax. So we need to encourage folks to get rid of that junk that the Congress critters are pulling on us and replace it all with a fair tax.
I have a thought. We talk each week about the differences between the income tax and a tax on consumption. And I would like to pose a question to everyone who is out there listening, and then you can pass this on to your friends. You like to be in control, right?
Mm-hmm.
You like to be in control, like pretty
Yes,
much. Everybody's going to
especially if I'm flying the airplane. Yes, I do.
say, thank you very much. So, what is it about the income tax that puts you in control? You're constantly having to prove that you need the money that you've already sent to the Treasury in the form of withholding off of paychecks and taxes and things like that, and estimated taxes and all like that. So you like to be in control, but why is it that you can't let the income tax go away? Why can you? Why do you have to hold on to that as something that's sacred to how things work? Is it just because that's what we've always known, or what is keeping you from saying, hey, you know what, I need to consider a tax on consumption, specifically the fair tax, and so that's kind of where I'm at. Is why
Okay.
why do we why are we what are we holding back from? Is it us as the citizenry, or
Well,
is it the fact that the our elected officials are kind of putting their foot in the dam of
the problem is that all the Congress critters and the lobbyists and the folks up there in Washington, they want to have the control, and the income tax system gives it to them instead of us. So that's why it's going to be hard to get it changed. But whatever we need to keep on moving here on Fair
yeah.
Tax Power Radio. Now, I have mentioned several times before that I get advanced copies of the chairman's reports and things like that. I just kind of help them edit it for clarity and ease of reading. And Jade Wally wrote a chairman's report here that I got to look at a couple of days ago that had a really neat thing in it. He was touching on the theme that the fair tax has something for everyone. of course, in the chairman's report, he had kind of limited time to develop that thought, but I said, all right, I'm going to borrow that from him. And let's extend that out here and do a couple of episodes of Fair Tax Power Radio on the idea that the fair tax has something for everyone. And of course, the first thing we think about is all these different political ideologies that are literally at war with each other these days. But if you look at it, there is something in the fair tax for every political ideology. And let's start by looking at the, progressives and Democrats who traditionally define themselves as friends of the little guy, quite vocal in advocating for who they see as marginalized groups, those on the lower end of the economic spectrum and all. Now, unfortunately, progressives and Democrats today often portray the fair tax, as a tax cut for the rich at the expense of the poor. Of course, if you've been listening for any length of time, that's a talking point they apply to every tax proposal that doesn't come from Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders, But anyway, if you could put aside the partisan branding, look at what's actually in the fair tax, you would find that progressives and Democrats would find a lot to like about it.
That's true. The sales taxes, as we know them today, are regressive. They apply to every dollar spent on taxable items, and everyone, rich or poor, pays the same rate, usually around 7 to 10%. Everyone paying the same rate sounds fair until you realize that Elon Musk could lose 10% of his wealth to the tax man and still live quite comfortably on what's left. However, taking 10% away from a single mom trying to raise 3 kids on a minimum wage income would be devastating. Progressives want a tax system that leaves the single mom alone while digging deep into Elon Musk's pocket and anybody that fits into that category, that income strata. The fair tax is a lot more progressive than many progressives and Democrats realize. We mentioned this not so long ago on Fair Tax Power Radio. A family making a poverty level income and spending every dime they make would pay no fair tax out of their own pocket. None. Zero. Every dime of fair tax paid at the cash register is refunded to them in the prebate. Many fair tax critics simply dismiss the prebate as inadequate without really looking at the numbers. But the inescapable truth is that families spending at or near the poverty level pay little or no fair tax out of their meager earnings.
And by little to none, we mean exactly that, little to none. Now, today, those low-income wage earners, they lose 7.65% of their earnings to the federal payroll taxes. Now, those payroll taxes have been described as the most regressive taxes on the federal books. They apply starting at the first dollar anybody earns, and this the Social Security tax, that FICA deduction, that's capped at $176,100. So high income earners who make more than that, in wages and salary anyway, they pay zero Social Security tax on their earnings above that level, while the low income earner who makes a lot less than that pays these payroll taxes on every dollar they make. And further, the payroll tax, by definition, a payroll tax does not apply to investment income, capital gains income, things like that many wealthy people receive. Now, noted progressive Robert Reich once was quoted to say, the payroll tax is regressive as hell. So, I agree with him. It is. The fair tax eliminates these horribly regressive payroll taxes. Now, what true progressive wouldn't really love to see that go away?
How many people actually realize, the differences in what we're talking about in terms of income tax or the fair tax, tax on consumption? Some progressives argue that by eliminating the income tax, the fair tax takes away the refundable tax credits, like the earned income tax credit, the child tax credit, the American Opportunity Tax Credit that low-income families depend on to survive. It's true that those tax credits will no longer be in existence when the fair tax replaces the income tax, but there's nothing in the fair tax that prevents Congress from making this help available to low-income families as standalone programs. For example, the same eligibility rules that apply to the earned income tax credit could apply to government grants for low-income families. Getting rid of the income tax doesn't necessarily mean getting rid of the help it supplies to low-income families.
Absolutely correct. And if you look at another core progressive goal, helping disadvantaged and low income individuals escape from poverty, which is certainly a noble goal, is something that progressives are really big on. And everyone knows getting a good education, one of the surest ways to get out of poverty and get on the road to upward mobility. And under the fair tax, tuition and education expenses are not considered retail purchases under the fair tax. So the fair tax does not tax those expenditures. So the fair tax makes it easier for families to afford college or vocational training or whatever they want to do. And I mean, if you really subscribe to the progressive viewpoint, how could you possibly oppose a tax system that makes it easier for those on the lower end of the economic spectrum to achieve upward mobility? That makes no sense.
Another huge progressive goal is to make sure the rich pay their fair share. We hear it all the time, repeated by not only progressive politicians during the election cycles, vote for me and I'll make the rich pay their fair share. We hear it a lot of other places too, news media, et cetera. Of course, that never really seems to happen. And it
Wonder
seems,
why.
yeah, well, there's a lot of reasons. Well, it seems the fair share is never explicitly defined. It continues to vaguely mean more than they're paying now. I'm not sure any true progressive thinker will ever be satisfied that the rich are paying their fair share. This has been a really good talking point for them, and they don't want to lose it. But let's put the talking point aside for a moment and look at one concrete, indisputable fact. The tax code was written by millionaires for millionaires. There are myriad ways of wealth taxpayers that they can reduce their tax liability that most other taxpayers can't. These include private foundations where they get tax breaks for donating to their own foundation.
Oh, that's a slick one. There's a lot. There's a lot in the tax code, and we see this a lot on the Fair Tax Power Radio Congress.gov segment. Depreciation of assets that lets wealthy people who have these depreciable assets, reduce their tax liability. Where you and I just don't have that option open to us.
Not at all. Borrowing against investments is another one. Loans aren't considered taxable income, so the wealthy can generate large amounts of cash by borrowing against investments and pay no tax.
Yeah, this is a sneaky one. Hiding assets offshore, investing in a foreign business, or you just stashing stuff away in a foreign bank account. I guess that's technically open to anybody who wants to, but it seems that only the wealthy are the ones that are doing that. They have enough to stash away to hide from the tax system to make it worth the effort it takes to do that.
A little accounting sleight of hand, possibly partnership basis shifting, moving assets among related partnerships to inflate deductions.
Yeah, and I bet you didn't know there was something called a grantor retained annuity trust. That is something that the wealthy person can set up in which they transfer appreciating assets into one of these trusts, and then they get tax-free annuity payments off of those things. Again, that is a trick that's available to the wealthy that is not available to the rest of us under the income tax.
Yes, I need to speak with my accountant, Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe, and see if
Uh-huh.
set one of those up for sure. The GRATs, as they are called. 1031 exchanges allow deferral of capital gains taxes when swapping one investment property for another is another way that wealthy taxpayers can reduce their taxpayer liability.
Yeah, and then I tell you, these things require complex legal structures. They cost a lot to set up, and so only the wealthy can afford to take advantage of them. And the pure, unadulterated truth here is that the income tax code is just absolutely riddled. Thousands upon thousands of pages of exemptions and deductions and credits and loopholes and special rules for things like depreciating assets. Many of these things are aimed at really narrow target groups, i.e., people that have a good lobby. And again, in a lot of cases, it takes a professional, expensive tax professional to root these things out and set up the legal structure in place you need to take care of it. So only the wealthy can afford to do that. And the point here, All of these deductions, exemptions, credits, loopholes go away with the fair tax. Now, it is elegant in its simplicity and its effectiveness. Again, no one pays the fair tax on their basic necessities, but beyond that, the more you spend, the more tax you pay. I mean, mathematical certainty there. So, I mean, you mentioned earlier, progressives want a tax system that leaves the single mother of three on the minimum wage, leaves them alone while digging deep into Elon Musk's pocket, and the fair tax does exactly that. Progressives should love it.
And we talk about political ideology and all. Many progressives are also environmentalists, but there are also some conservatives that are environmentalists
Yeah.
too. Conservation comes to mind when you think about a conservative. The fair tax has the potential to be the greenest legislation ever passed. By not taxing used items, the fair tax encourages people to buy used rather than new goods. Expect demand for used items to increase dramatically. Expect new businesses to spring up, offering gently used clothing, furniture, tools, electronics, etc., to meet the demand. The fair tax will encourage reuse and recycling in a way nothing on the books today can match. It also may mean that new items, when manufactured, let's just say clothing, for example, could be made to last a lot longer than they do today.
Mm-hmm. That's possibly true. So, there's a good bit of the fair tax that if progressives would just look at what it actually does, there's a lot in there for them to like, and they really ought to get on board. Let's switch gears here and look at libertarians. Remember that Neil Bortz, who co-wrote the fair tax book with John Linder, was a libertarian. Now, they often argue that income tax penalizes productivity and it violates property rights. I mean, their contention is the government has no right to take property away from you by force.
Right.
So by replacing the income tax with the fair tax, the national consumption tax, the fair tax will get rid of an arbitrary coercive system of taxation where the government just helps itself to whatever it wants right off the top of your income. And we would note at the top of this section here that the Internal Revenue Service, notorious for blatantly ignoring basic rights enumerated in the Bill of Rights. They routinely violate the Fourth Amendment protection against unreasonable search and seizure. The IRS will obtain information about you or other taxpayers from third parties, think banks or crypto exchanges and stuff like that. So they go digging for information about you without warrants, without any notice or something, and that is a violation of the Fourth Amendment. The IRS does it all the time.
Well, the IRS also violates the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination by forcing everyone to file tax returns.
Yeah.
Information supplied by taxpayers themselves is used against them whenever honest mistakes are made or when taxpayers misunderstand impossibly complex rules issued by the U.S. Treasury through the IRS.
Oh, mercy. That's crazy. What really galls my gizzards sometimes, though, is how the IRS operates on the principle of guilty until proven innocent. Taxpayers who have not even been charged with a crime, much less been convicted of one, but they've had their property and their bank accounts seized by the IRS on the mere allegation, well, we think you might be doing something wrong here. So just Google civil asset forfeiture and see what you find. But this guilty until proven innocent, I mean, just directly, contrary to the spirit of the American constitutional rights here. And again, the IRS does it all. That's just the way they do business, and it's wrong.
Well, if you remember the Andy Griffith show, Andy Griffith was not only the sheriff, but he was also the judge, the justice of the peace. So at least initially, the Internal Revenue Service gets to act as both prosecutor and judge. When the IRS accuses a taxpayer of an impropriety, it's the IRS, not an independent entity, that gets to decide if the taxpayer's defense is adequate.
How do you like that for having a tax system?
Sheriff Andy Taylor was a little bit more lenient. As when we watch the Andy Griffith show, we know that to be very true.
Absolutely. And the IRS also is notorious. We've noted this several times. They go after taxpayers who don't have the resources to fight back. they make a lot of noise about we're going to go after all these rich tax cheats, but in reality, they're going after people who do not have the resources to fight back. Now, even though technically, adverse IRS decisions can be appealed to a tax court, but all too often, and Steve Hayes would tell you this if he was here, as a recovering tax attorney, as he calls himself, he says he often has advised people, if the IRS demands something from you, just pay it. It's a lot easier and cheaper to just pay what the IRS is demanding from you, whether they're right or not. It's easier to just pay them than it is to fight it in court, and the IRS knows it, and they take advantage of that. That's insane.
Every day, every day. Libertarians generally believe that taxation should be voluntary, not coercive. Although I know a few libertarians, and I wake up in every morning thinking I might be closer to libertarian than anything else, who believe that there shouldn't be taxes at all. But we know that won't happen. While you don't get the option to avoid taxation altogether, the fair tax gives people much more control over the taxes they pay than the income tax does. You decide when you're taxed and how much you are taxed based on when you choose to spend your money and how much you choose to spend. Also, taxpayers can legally avoid the fair tax by buying used goods rather than new goods. It's going to change the way we process information. Libertarians are also strong advocates of smaller, less intrusive, more efficient government. Infrastructure that's already in place at the state level is used to administer and enforce the fair tax. The federal government can replace the Internal Revenue Service with its multi-billion-dollar budget and far-reaching power with a smaller receiving office in the Treasury Department that will have no authority at all to investigate or initiate enforcement action against any individual taxpayer because their relationship is going to be with the states.
Absolutely. So again, there's obviously a lot in the fair tax for libertarians to like, and a lot of the things that appeal to libertarians also appeal to conservatives as well. Of course, a big conservative issue these days is immigration. We've talked about that. Conservatives like the idea of discouraging illegal immigration, encouraging legal immigration. And we've mentioned before that the fair tax prebate is given only to legal U.S. residents. If you're in the country illegally, you will pay the full 23% fair tax rate on every purchase you make. So qualifying for the prebate will be a strong incentive for folks to get legal, and if they're here illegally, and to come here legally to begin with instead of illegally in the first place. So then you can get the progressive nature of the fair tax applied to you if you do that.
That's right. A number of Republicans today, including President Trump, are on record saying they want to get rid of the income tax. They dance around the consumption tax and specifically H.R. 25. The simple fact is that the fair tax is the only tax reform proposal that will accomplish getting rid of the income tax. A flat tax won't do it. A flat tax, remember, you hear it on the program all the time, the flat tax is still an income tax. A flat tax will still require withholding and tax returns. A flat tax will still require the Internal Revenue Service. The president's External Revenue Service, based on collecting tariffs, won't do it. Tariffs are not designed to replace the income tax. They're tools used to enforce fair trade. The fair tax was specifically designed to replace the income tax, and again, it's the only legislative proposal that will accomplish the stated desire.
Okay, Republicans, step up and put your money where your mouth is. Get behind the fair tax. It does what you say you want to do. And you'll also hear a lot of conservatives expressing both support and admiration for the founding fathers and the founding principles upon which the original Constitution rests. Now, you realize we've mentioned before as well, the original Constitution, not only did it not authorize an income tax, it specifically forbade one. The founding fathers, in their infinite wisdom, says, no income tax here. So it took the 16th Amendment to get around the original constitutional prohibition on an income tax. And of course, the fair tax bill itself does not repeal the 16th Amendment. No legislation can do that. There's a separate process. for amending the Constitution. But the fair tax does include this sunset clause that says if the 16th Amendment is not repealed, through the normal amendment process, then the fair tax goes away after 7 years. The fair tax cannot be fully and permanently implemented until and unless the 16th Amendment is gone. Conservatives would like that. They see repealing the 16th Amendment as a return to the original principles of limited federal power and their right.
And finally, conservatives are advocates for free markets. They maintain that strengthening the overall economy is a better way to improve people's lives than government programs and handouts. We've noted many times here on FAIRtax Power Radio that economists from all over the political spectrum agree that a consumption tax like the fair tax is much better for the economy than an income tax. More than one economist has called the fair tax rocket fuel for the economy. Under the income tax, a 4% GDP growth is considered a strong performance. Multiple projections have predicted that we could easily see, wait for it, 10% GDP growth or better if the fair tax were to replace the income tax. So 4% with the income tax, 10% or better with the fair tax. What do you think? There's really no doubt about it. If you strip away the political posturing and grandstanding and look simply at what the fair tax does, there's truly something for everyone to like about the fair tax. We need to bind together and make it happen. And the midterm elections is the perfect time to do that. So let's get going.
Absolutely. And we have run past our regular time here. You're going to have to edit this a little bit for radio. But it is just true. If you get away from all the political talking points on all sides, there is something in the fair tax for everyone to like, regardless of what your political ideology is. So let's bind together and make this happen. Jerk it out by the roots, the income tax code, and replace it with the fair tax. And that's going to wrap up this edition of FAIRtax Power Radio. We are a slap out of time and then some. So we will see you same time, same channel next week here on FAIRtax Power Radio. Until we meet again, I'm Bob Paxton.
I'm Bob Scarborough.
We are the FAIRtax guys, reminding you the fair tax is the only truly fair tax. Once you understand it,
you'll demand it.
Roll Tide.
So what do you need from me to get these taxes collected?
Glad you asked, because there is a fair amount of information you need to be aware of.
That's your tax plan?
Oh, no, this is just the revisions for this year's tax plan. What I need from you is you need to keep track of all of your income, as well as any taxes that you've already paid. Also, any gifts that you received or gifts you've given to churches or charities or individuals throughout the entire year. Do you do any side jobs?
Every now and again.
Great, because there's some more information about that right here. Everything you need to know right here. So just simply compile that, send it in to us. Be careful, make sure there's no mistakes. If we do find mistakes were made, we can fine you or, throw you in jail. So you might want to be aware of that.
And what do you need from me?
As an individual, nothing. As a business owner, or if you're doing side jobs, yes, you would have to collect taxes on that, but, it's all right here.
Can I get a copy of that?